Wellness Entrepreneur Podcast, episode 55. And it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me. Happy day. Yes, I'm one of those birthday people.
Starting an online business can be a lonely ride, especially when you're trying to change the world one day at a time. But you're home now, in a place where inspiration flows thick and fast, and we arm you with the how-tos to get started, grow, and thrive in business. Welcome to the Wellness Entrepreneur Podcast with business coach and trainer Katie Wyatt. The mission of the show is to simplify online business so you can focus on your mission rather than your marketing, because it doesn't have to be that hard. Let's leverage your time so you can have more impact and amplify your message. You are a change maker. We need you loud and clear. Wellness entrepreneurs. Passion can change the world and make good business.
Good morning, podcast listeners. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you're well. I hope business is good. I definitely just want to start by saying thank you to those of you who, after the last episode where I asked for you to kind of get in touch and give me some feedback on the show and things like that, quite a few of you did, which was really awesome. So thank you so much. It's been amazing to hear what the show means to you. Some of the stuff has really surprised me and touched my heart. So thank you. I am not going to dwell this morning. I'm going to jump straight into this cracker of an interview. And just before I do, I wanted to ask if you would be so kind to subscribe, rate, and review my podcast in iTunes. It would make me so happy. It helps people find me, and it just helps me stay up in the charts where I am. But, I'd love to be there for longer and higher and all of that, so that more gorgeous entrepreneurs just like you can find the show and be inspired. And speaking of inspiration, today, you're going to be inspired. I caught up with a wellness entrepreneur who is doing some really cool stuff online. So her name is Katie. Excellent name for a wellness entrepreneur. Katie Dalebout. And she has a podcast. It was once called The Wellness Wonderland, but now it's called Let It Out. And she started her podcast off the back of a successful blog where she discussed, she shared lots of wellness things, but also talked about her own wellness journey after dealing with eating disorders as a young woman. She's recently published a book, Let It Out, which contains heaps of fabulous journaling exercises. I love it. It's really brought me back to journaling. It's fabulous. She's a mentee of Gabby Bernstein and is becoming quite an influencer in this little online world we like to hang out in, Wellness Girls. So without further ado, enjoy this ep with Katie, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to the podcast, Katie. It's so fun to have you and to have another person called Katie on the podcast.
Yeah, I know. Great name. And we spell it the same too.
I know. I seem to find so many people in the wellness space with the name Katie or Kate. I don't know. Is it a thing?
That's so funny. Growing up, there were a lot of Katies in my class. I was always one of like 4 or 5.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I think it's much more, it's not a name you hear a lot these days with babies, but it was a certain era.
Yeah, when I was young, it was everywhere.
Oh, it's so cute. Well, I'm going to jump straight in because I'm just so excited to have got you on the podcast finally. I've just been devouring your book, which I'd love to ask you about, and I've also dipped in and out of your podcast over my podcasting journey. So you do have a lot of strings to your bow. Can you tell us, how do you describe what you do as an entrepreneur?
Oh gosh. Well, I really think of myself as I'm definitely not a expert. I'm more of an enthusiast or a curator, I guess. I am really passionate about what I'm passionate about, and I'm really curious about what I'm curious about, and I'm really excited about what I'm excited about. So I think it's just, a matter of me finding cool things and sharing them with an audience in some sort of capacity. And I started off blogging, and I started this blog when I was in college, and it really grew, and then that turned into a podcast in 2013, which was awesome because back then, podcasting wasn't what it is now. It was still pretty niche, and it was before Serial, which made things really famous, I think. And I got to have these conversations that I curated, really awesome guests to come on the show, and it really gave me a lot, and that ended up growing quite a bit. And then I ended up getting a book deal from there, which is a book about journaling, which is curated as well, because I really curated a bunch of great tools and prompts that I learned from other people and were inspired by other things in my life that really inspired me. Everything from like an episode of Seinfeld to my favorite movie to, a lesson from a spiritual teacher or, whatever. So that is really what came to become my book and culminated in everything I've learned in my early 20s was really distilled into that book, Let It Out, A Journey Through Journaling, which just came out a couple months ago. And so I would say I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I do a little bit of writing, I do a little bit of podcasting, I do a little bit of book writing and blogging. And so I'm doing lots of different things at once. And to be honest with you, that's kind of been a struggle for me recently. I'm wanting more focus. So I'm going to put some things on the back burner and really focus on getting really good at one or two things that I do and really stepping up the game of my podcast and really making it what I want it to be and what I know it can be. And then, it's not that I won't return to writing, but I will later. And I'm, just really kind of navigating what works. And, kind of a mentor told me recently that instead of, I'm an ideas person, so I have a lot of ideas and I am constantly wanting to do more things. So I find that can be really challenging. And this mentor who I was asking about that to, he was like, a therapist told him once to not worry about that, and that just means you're a creative person, and that just means you have a creative personality, and instead to simply keep creating a lot of stuff with all of those ideas. Don't limit yourself, because whatever one needs to rise to the surface, whichever one is most important to you, it just will rise to the top if you keep taking action and moving forward. And I think it just kind of sends a sign to the universe that you're taking action, and then whichever one is meant to rise to the top will. But you don't need to limit yourself to just one or two things. You can keep starting a bunch of projects, even if you don't finish them all.
Oh, I like that. Permission to start and not finish.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to give ourselves that sort of permission.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that you use the word curator, because I use similar words to describe what I do, especially with the podcast, because it is bringing, we're curating the content and the guests that we're bringing to the table. So I really love that. And you talked about curiosity, and I've been, I suppose, interrogating curiosity a bit lately around whether, is it something that you're born with, or is it almost a skill that you can hone, or a trait that you can really grow and exercise like a muscle? Have you just always been a curious person, or do you find that it's something that's gotten stronger the more that you've used it?
That's a really interesting question. I think, yeah, I'm sure it's gotten stronger because I do the podcast. But to be honest with you, I think my baseline level of curiosity was pretty high to begin with. I have always been someone who had a lot of questions, asked a lot of questions, I've always been very perceptive of people and places and noticing things. And, I'm an only child, so I grew up surrounded by adults. I often joke, like, I grew up on an adult farm. There were no kids around and just me. So had a lot of adult conversations, or I guess I didn't have adult conversations, but I was just around adults who were having conversations. So that was just how I interacted with children. I never felt like a child. Like I don't have that same nostalgia of people of like, oh, I wish that I was a kid again. Childhood honestly felt like kind of trapped for me. Like I felt sort of trapped. Not that I had an amazing family in childhood, but I just was like really excited to be an adult when I had more freedom and I could, do things for myself. I just was very like smothered as an only child around lots of adults. I was very taken care of and controlled. And so being an adult is amazing. It's so freeing and I really love it. So I think that sort of curiosity for life and what I can do and what other people do and how people are and what makes people feel their feelings. And I've always just like felt a lot of feelings and just been pretty curious. And then that's why I think I started the podcast, is because it gave me this outlet to put some of that energy and ask people questions that I was curious about, genuinely curious about, just because I say I'm recording it. I was able to go deep with people the first time I ever talk with them and, bypass small talk. And that's what I've really wanted to do. So yeah, I think to answer your question, I think, yes, I've always been highly curious, but I think I've also, I'm sure, grown that curiosity a little bit as well as I've gotten into doing this podcast.
Yeah, awesome. And so I want to talk about the book because I do love it, and it's definitely something that I found a really great way to bring myself back to something that I used to practice every single day, being journaling. And I love as well that it really isn't just about journaling, because as you say, it's also the topics that you cover include organization and mindfulness and productivity and manifesting and healing. And I just love that it is so expansive in the power that you bring to the journaling process. But I did think, there's so many things, and this comes back to what you were saying about having lots of ideas. And I'm sure that there were a lot of things that you felt when you were sitting down to write a book that you could have written about. Like, given the range of topics that you've covered on your blog and your podcast over the years, I'm sure you're, just as knowledgeable in a number of topics. So how did you go about the process of deciding that you were going to write about journaling?
Well, you're very sweet that you think I would have other topics that I was qualified to write on because I don't know about that. But I mean, to be honest about, how I decided to write on journaling, it was really because I loved journaling. It was helpful for me and I kind of fell into it. I was never a journaler as a kid. I wasn't, as a teenager or even, as a college student. It was never something that I did. And then at the end of college, I was going through something where I had lots of people around me, lots of mentors, lots of therapists. I was seeing a dietitian and coaches, and I was just really, really trying to figure out who I was, because I had this eating disorder, and I was also graduating from college, and I also just didn't really know where my life was headed and where I wanted it to head, but I knew it was exciting. I knew on some level that I was in this really exciting place. And that somehow led me to the self-help section of a bookstore when I had a gift card. And instead of buying yet another self-help book, I wandered into the stationery department of the store, and I used my gift card on a colorful journal. And I spent that summer sitting outside, writing in my journal, and being super authentic and vulnerable and real in my journal, writing about my feelings and what was going on with me, more so than I'd been in therapy or with my family or close friends, because with other people, there's this filtering that I think occurs for me which comes from a fear of judgment. I mean, even if you're super close with someone, there's always a little bit of filtering that happens when you're sharing something with them, and we fear judgment. So I was able to be completely authentic and vulnerable and real with myself, which then led me to be able to be more vulnerable and real with other people, which people love and I think is really amazing and allows you to connect with people when you're vulnerable and real. And that practicing in my journal allowed me to do it with people. So that was really cool. And I loved journaling and I found it cathartic. I felt relief. It just was really helpful to me. So I kept doing it. And a couple of years later, I was recommending it to friends pretty often. And they were being like, well, that's so cool that you do that, but I want to do it, but I don't really have anything to say, and I'm not a writer. And I realized, I thought about it, and I was like, well, how come they aren't doing this, or they want to, or they feel like they can't, but I can? And I was like, I feel like I'm not a writer. I don't really have anything to say, like, why am I able to journal? And then I just realized, I was like, oh, anybody can do this. If you can write a text, you can journal. If you can write an email, you can journal. It's just having a conversation with yourself as you would a close friend. And I wanted to help people have an experience with journaling because journaling was so helpful for me. So I just kind of put this together. I put together a proposal and I ended up getting a book deal. And then from there I had to write the book, which was a whole other thing. But it was great. It was great. It was really a time where I could take everything I've learned and distill it into journaling prompts and journaling tools. Like you said, there's tools to get organized, there's tools to heal, tools to feel your feelings, there's tools that are really serious, tools that are really funny. It kind of ended up becoming like a scavenger hunt for your mind. And so that's really how I decided to write the book. And yeah, and I'm really proud of it. It's something that I'm really grateful that I did.
Yeah, and I think you should be. And so what's your work process like when it comes to writing a book? I mean, it is obviously almost like small vignettes because each exercise is different, but it's still a much longer form piece than a blog post or a podcast. So do you have a particular process around writing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So you're right. It was easier for me, I think, because of that fact that it was broken into those little vignettes and more structured. It wasn't like writing a novel or even a memoir. So that made the process a little bit different. But, the way I did it, obviously, or maybe not obviously to the people listening, but writing that book wasn't the only job that I had during that time. I mean, it still isn't, but I was doing a lot of other things at that time. And so I had to, and I'm also someone I'm a morning person. I'm freshest in the morning, I'll say. Like I lose energy throughout the day and I don't really work well in the evenings. So I would wake up really early before I would have to work on other things. And from 5 a.m., sometimes it was like 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. or something like that, I would not do anything other than get up and I would get some water and I would sit down at my computer and I would write. And that's what I did. And then after, I would tell myself, actually what I did once I was really in the process of writing it, is that I would tell myself I only had to do it for half an hour. So, but it had to be the first thing I did when I woke up in the morning for 1/2 an hour was write. And I would do that. I would get out of bed, I would get water, I would sit down for a half an hour and I would write. And then after the half an hour, I could either keep writing a little bit more, and sometimes I would, or I could stop. But if I stopped, before I stopped, I always had to figure out and mark where I was in the writing and what I was going to write the next day or the next time I came back to writing. Because sometimes during the day I would write again in the later morning or afternoon or even evening. I would, do another half an hour sprint or something. But before I was done with that half an hour session, I had to mark where I was and write down like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to write this journaling tool, or tomorrow I'm, writing, flushing out this thing in the introduction, or I need to redo that area, or I need to start on page 72 or whatever it was, right? Because what I found was the difference between writing a book and writing like a short story or an essay or a blog post or a newsletter or anything I'd ever written in my life is that it was so much larger, just, simply as a file, you know what I mean? Like it was so vast that I couldn't, if I was to write on Monday and then not return to it until the next day, I wouldn't return to it on Tuesday or Wednesday because I would be so overwhelmed of like, where do I even go from here? And so I wouldn't like return to it until like Thursday. And then Thursday I would sit down and be like, all right, where was I? And I would have to spend all of the half an hour figuring out where I was, because it wasn't like an essay where I could just read paragraph 1 and 2 and then get right back on to paragraph 3 and finish it up. I had to, every single time I felt like I had to, I simply couldn't read back everything I had written so far. I had to keep going. So that was really positive for me. And then it made me want to get to working on it the next day or the next session I was going to write, because I knew, I already marked down where I was. I'm going to continue on that path, so doing it in those little sprints, that was how I got it done. And every single day I would write down on a Post-it note or in my document on my computer, like tomorrow, finishing up this or whatever. And that was huge for me.
That's a gold tip. Like, I think it's, it's the same sort of things that help us be more productive in anything that we do is by pre-planning and knowing exactly what we're going to do the next day, whether it's about your business or your life or, life admin, whatever it is. But I love that you've applied that to such a creative pursuit. I think that's brilliant. And does your podcasting process differ at all? I mean, obviously the type of work you do in podcasting in terms of recording with people and then the work that comes after, does that feel like a really different work process, or do you have particular times of the day that you prefer to record? Like, how does that vary?
Yeah. So, podcasting is completely different just because it's just kind of all over the place. I would love for it to be more streamlined, to be honest. But I record basically a bunch of times a week. I'm not really recording very often right now because I've been on like a book tour and I've just been doing a lot of stuff, but I'll record usually in the evenings, usually around 6 or 7, and people schedule a time with me to come on the podcast that works for them. And I will prepare the week before. Like, for instance, last week I had a really big interview on Friday. And so I spent most of that week preparing for that interview. So sometimes I don't spend that long preparing, but I did for this particular one. So how I usually prepare is I listen to every other podcast they've ever been on. And because I want it to be fresh and different, I want to ask different questions, and I want to just have a lot of knowledge about the person. And then I also, explore their work. So I'll read their book. If they've written a book, I'll watch their movie. If they've been in a movie, like I'll just really immerse myself in whatever work that they do. And then I'll have like a note in my phone of like questions to ask Josh Radner, or whoever I'm having on the podcast,
Yeah.
And so I'll start writing out those questions on my phone just whenever I think of one. And then I'll put that into a Google Doc, and then I'll have, notes and questions for that interview. And then I'll do the interview. And then from there, it's like a whole nother process. And usually it sits on my computer for a while because I have, like right now, I have maybe like 20 or 30 episodes on my computer that still need to be aired. And then I'll, once I'm ready to air an episode, the process is I listen to it and I take notes on it for the show notes. And then I figure out if there's like a sponsor for that episode, I'll get that interview done, and then I upload that. And then I record an intro in GarageBand. I hope this isn't too like granular. I
No,
don't
it's
know if
great.
it's boring. But I do an intro in GarageBand where I'll just be like, "Hi everybody, here's the guest for the week. We talk about this. The show is sponsored by whoever, if there's a sponsor." And I'll like give reminders of like check out my book, whatever. And then I upload that and the other, like the meat of the episode, to Dropbox. And then my assistant actually is my podcast producer, so she will mix it all together for me now, which is great. I used to do it myself for many years, but that's amazing help that I have from her now. And so she'll mix it into a podcast and upload that on iTunes and on YouTube and on everywhere that people listen. And then on Wednesdays they come out, and then I'll spend a little bit of time on Wednesday just kind of sharing that, like putting it out into the world. It's kind of like you take the dog and just kind of set them into the pool and are like, have fun, So that's kind of what I do on Wednesdays. I'll tweet and be like, new episode is up, and send the link, and I'll send an email to my list, and I'll send a Facebook message out that there's a new podcast, and then I get to kind of talk about it with people. And that's my favorite part my two favorite parts of it are recording it, listening back to it can be really fun, especially if I haven't listened for a couple of weeks, and then putting it out there and getting people's reaction is my number one favorite part. And honestly, preparing for the podcast, I really enjoy as well, because I only have on the show people who I'm really passionate about their work, and I am a connoisseur of their work. So it's fun to dive into someone's work and spend time with them, through their work for the week before they're coming on the podcast, preparing for the episode. I really enjoy that part of it as well.
Beautiful. And I'm impressed that you are still doing so much of the well, not the editing obviously, but even the listening back and doing the show notes. Like because can be really time consuming, and that's something that I've outsourced myself I've got a great person that works with me on doing my show notes for me. It is a hard part to outsource, but when you find the right person, it's fantastic. But that's amazing. Like, you're putting so much effort into the podcast. And so you did mention at the start, like, the podcast is really the place where you want to narrow in and focus. What do you have grand plans that you're sort of up for sharing, or is it just more taking it to the next level and evolving it?
Sure, yeah. Well, I recently was on a hiatus for the podcast, and it's coming back. I'm not sure when this will air, but this coming week, and I'm switching it all kind of up. Not really the format, but it just kind of got a facelift. I switched the name of the podcast to a new name. And I have like a new jingle and a new album cover image, and the content will still largely be the same. I'll still be interviewing people and having an honest conversation with them, just, like we would if we were at a coffee shop or something like that. But I just really kind of wanted to up level what I was doing a little bit with that. So I decided to kind of rebrand the podcast. And I just really want to focus on it. I want to spend some time and energy on it, because for the last 5 or 6 months, I was really, really outsourcing it. So I was just kind of recording them and then sending them to Amanda and not really thinking about it too much. And I want to get back into thinking about it more and having the best guests I can possibly have on the podcast. And I guess a step that I forgot to mention is finding the guests that I want to have on the podcast and reaching out to them and following up with them and scheduling with them. So now that I say it all out like that, and this, there's a lot of work that goes into doing a podcast.
There is a lot of work. A good one, yeah. I mean, because you can do a lot of that stuff more lightly, but obviously even just that immersion process that you're taking is inviting a lot more work than just jumping on with someone and letting a conversation unfold. Yeah.
Yeah, it totally is. And I really enjoy it, and I want it to be better. I want it to grow. I want it to reach more people and more listeners. That's a big goal for me, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's all really relative, I think, to, how much work people want to put into it. And I just have a lot of ideas for my podcast, and I'm going to be doing little mini series on it. And I might even be starting a separate new podcast. I'm just trying to kind of navigate that and figure it out, and how I want to bring another idea into the world, whether it's a podcast or some sort of other type of series. So I don't know. We'll see.
I love it. I love when you have conversations with somebody that are just exactly mirroring what's going on in yourself. Because I've recently launched a second podcast, and I'm thinking about rebranding my current one. So it's really cool to listen to you talk about your process, and I can't wait to see what it turns into. You talked about finding guests and approaching them, and I'm sure you probably get lots of people pitching you, but there would still be people that you're wanting to reach out to who maybe you don't know, or who aren't as aware of you as I'm sure lots of people now are. How do you go about that approach? And is it something that, I find that most people say yes, that was something that I was fearful of at the start. And I know a lot of people starting to podcast think, oh, everyone will say no to me, and it just doesn't happen. But do you have a particular way you go about it?
Yeah, I do. I will say, I get a lot of no's as well. I get a lot of yeses, but I do get a lot of no's. And I think it's important to say that because, I think it's really easy to look at people and think that everyone says yes to their podcast when that's not necessarily the case. I would always joke when I was starting that, I asked so many people on my podcast to be on my podcast that statistically somebody had to say yes, and I just sent out a lot of emails, and that's what I did, honestly, just when I started out. And what I found was at the beginning, I think I'm getting more no's now than I did at the beginning, because at the beginning I was asking people who I vaguely knew or that were kind of like at a similar level. So they were more likely to say yes, and they all did. And I'm so grateful for them. And then now I'm trying to grow and expand and ask more people and get a hold of more people that are harder to get a hold of. And so, it's challenging because I have to go through their agents, and it's just a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I've had a lot of success with the people that I've gotten to have on the podcast. And I think the biggest thing is that I only have people on the podcast that I'm genuinely fans of their work or of them, or I want to have a conversation with, and I think I think that they're cool. So that's a big deal, first of all. And then when I reach out to them, I humbly just thank them for their work and tell them that it was meaningful to me in some way. And then I say, hey, I have this podcast. I have, some people listening to it. So it would, it's a way to promote your work. Sometimes that is something that people might care about, if they have a book coming out or something that they want to promote to people, that might be a meaningful thing to say to them. Other times, the people who I'm asking to have on the podcast don't really care about that because they're not trying to promote anything, or they might have such a huge following that they, comparatively to me, that it wouldn't even be a blip in their, it wouldn't really help them with their platform at all by having them on my, relatively small podcast. So I won't even mention that. And I'll just be like, hey, I would love to have a conversation with you. Your work is really meaningful to me. I have this podcast. It would be really cool to have a conversation and record, if you would be down sometime. And just be really unattached to the outcome, not like, please come on this. I would do anything. Like, I think that's kind of unattractive to people. So I think just, thinking of everyone's just a person, and just say thank you for your work. I think you're really awesome. Give them compliments, and then, ask, hey, I have this podcast, when it would work for you, not I need you to come on for this week's episode or anything like that, putting it out there like that, I think they're likely to say yes. And I've gotten a lot of yeses. And I would say also be patient with people, because a lot of times people will be like, oh yeah, I would love to come on, but I'm swamped right now. Can you reach out in a couple weeks? And then I do follow up, where a lot of people might forget or not follow up, or not care anymore. I have enough episodes always on the back burner that I can't, or not on the back burner, just like in, on the deck, I think is the phrase, that I don't need to like have an episode this week or anything like that. So I can be really lax about when someone comes on the podcast. So if they, won't know their schedule for 2 weeks, I will set a reminder in my calendar that I'll reach out to them in 2 weeks. Or sometimes people have said to me, they're not doing interviews right now, but in 6 months they will be, and they have a new book coming out and they'll definitely want to come on. So I'll write that in my calendar to reach out to them in 6 months. And then another big thing is like when someone schedules with you, show up, like it's on your calendar. You have to be there. You can't reschedule unless there's an emergency. And it's work, it's a time where you're like, I am scheduled. I look at it as like I have a shift from that time to that time, and I have to be there, and I'm not going to reschedule it. And there have been times when I've had to reschedule something, or I've missed something, and I've missed out on being able to have that person on my podcast because they're not going to reschedule and they're not going to do it again. And that's okay. It happens, but I really, really learned from that, and I don't do that anymore. If I have to, I really don't reschedule, and I really show up for when I say I'm going to show up, and don't reach out to people until I'm ready to, have them on the podcast. So that's helpful. And then you can also, I've heard people say, this isn't really something that I do all the time, but if you're having someone on and you've had on a friend of theirs or a peer of theirs, you can send them a couple episodes of the podcast and be like, hey, will you come on my podcast? I've had on, this person, and this person who I think it was a great episode. I'd love to have you on as well, or something, and that's
cool.
Yeah.
I like that one. And I think you're right. Like whenever you're up leveling something that you're doing, you really, you kind of have to up level everything about it. And even just that being reliable and showing up when you say you're going to show up, like I think that's just a really great indicator that you are up leveling. And I mean, I feel the same about consistency. Like I teach podcasting, and I'm always on about like, if you're not going to commit to the consistency, then you're not going to see the results. Like you actually have to treat your podcast like it's a pro thing that you're doing if you want to see results anyway. That's really, really cool. And so when did, like, I know that you've done coaching and a few other collaborations in I suppose, in the business side of what you do. When did the whole creative content creation that you do turn into a business for you? Like, was it a planned thing, or have you just found that you've responded to what you were being asked for?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't all the time feel like it's a business, but it is. I didn't, when I started my blog in college, I was a college student studying journalism, and I thought I wanted to be a TV news reporter, but I loved blogging. And yeah, I think in college even I was like, I would love for this to be my job, I would love to have people send me stuff for free and talk about it and travel and somehow have money. And at the end of college, that like wasn't happening. And so I had to get a job, but I was still blogging on the side. And then from there, I was like, oh, maybe, as this grew, I was like, this could be something I could monetize potentially at some point. And so I still haven't figured out how to do that completely, but it has naturally had some revenue generating things that at least can fund as the very high expenses of having an online business. So for me, those expenses are hosting the website, hosting a very large, long podcast, getting someone to do my website and design my website, having an assistant help me with emails and help me with design and help me with, producing the podcast. That costs money every single week to pay her. I pay a designer to help me with like my design stuff, to pay, a book launch manager. So like everything I've made through my business has gone back into the business. But that's okay. And I think it will grow at some point, but right now that's where it's going. So I've been able to fund all of that through the business, which is great. And I do that through a couple ways. So I'll just really like open up the kimono and tell you all the ways that I make money from it. And, the first way is through, these aren't in any order, but I do some mentoring. So I do some coaching. So that's really high level people who want to know more about podcasting or want to know more about potentially blogging or want to work with me on body image or journaling, which is really, what my work centers around. And I'll work with them from a wellness perspective on helping them to develop a positive relationship with their bodies that really, allows them to get to know themselves beyond their physicality and allows them to develop deeper self-awareness. And I help people to make their life as a whole really beautiful and wonderful, not just their body, not just their relationship to food, but really, focusing on every aspect of their life, from their spirituality to their creativity, to their career, to their body, yes, to their relationships, all of it. And so I love my mentoring program. It's fantastic. It's a 3-month program and I work with clients one-on-one and I really enjoy that. So that's one thing that I do. I take on very few clients because it's not, full-time thing that I do, but I really do enjoy that. I obviously wrote the book, so that's a newer thing for me that I'm putting out into the world. And then I've done a few affiliate partnerships and collaborations. So I worked with this amazing all-natural holistic skincare line where I've, had them on the podcast and they've been a sponsor and affiliate, and, they even collaborated with me. I got to make my own fragrance. So I got to make a perfume with them, and it's called Wonder by Me. And that was such a dream to do. It was really fun to create a fragrance. It's something I always wanted to do. So that was really fun. And then I do a few other affiliate things and sponsorships for the podcast. So, if I really love something or an online program or something, I will promote it as an affiliate. So for instance, right now I'm promoting my mentor, Gabrielle Bernstein, has something called Spirit Junkie Masterclass, which is this beautiful program where Gabby teaches people about public speaking and publishing and book writing and being a coach, being a mentor, building a platform, getting followers, all of that. And I've been through her program. She created it really as a result of me and our relationship. She wrote the foreword to my book. So that is something that I promote and I am an affiliate for. So if people sign up through me, I make a cut of a small amount of money. So that is something that I'm like affiliate for right now. And I have a few other people, very few, that I will talk about their program on my podcast as an affiliate. If it's something that I've done and I've tried and I've liked, actually, no, not that I've liked, that I loved, that I really, really loved, then I will talk about it. If it's something that I did and thought was okay or just, was whatever, I won't be an affiliate for, but if I love it, I will. So that's another way that I've made some money. And I think that's it so far. So hopefully I do more sponsorships and make money through that. But, and I might, do an online course, maybe not. But that is where it is as of today.
Beautiful. I love that. It's been very organic, obviously, but I love that, it's still about, and I feel the same way about, particularly about affiliate marketing, is that I won't just promote things because I like the person. Like I feel you have to have gone through that experience and loved it to really, I think, use the platform that you have to promote it. So yeah, definitely agree with you there. I have loved this conversation and it is almost time to wrap it up. So I did want to invite you, like, how can people connect with you? What's the best way to hook up with Katie after this podcast if they want to?
Well, I am at Katie Dalebout, my name, on Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat. Snapchat's my favorite. Instagram, Facebook, everywhere I'm that. And my website's katiedalebout.com. But I think the best way to connect with me would be to sign up for my newsletter, my email list. And when you do, you get a free, really comprehensive guide. It's really awesome. I call it my Katie's favorite things, which I say in my Oprah voice because it's my favorite, videos, podcasts, tools, resources, movies, TV shows, foods, every kind of favorite you could ever imagine is in there with links. So that's super cool. And I highly suggest people sign up for that.
Lovely. That's beautiful. And we'll pop all those links into the show notes. Katie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey with us. I'm very much looking forward to see what's coming next with your podcast, but it's been really beautiful to connect. So thank you.
Katie, thank you. You are so awesome. You were a great host. It was really fun to talk about the business side of everything. And thank you so much for having me.
I do hope that you enjoyed that episode with Katie. Please let us know. Katie's on Twitter and so am I. There's only two Katies to remember. So Katie Dalebout, Dalebout, is her Twitter handle and mine is Katie T. Wyatt. So please shout out and let us know what you thought of this episode. And one last thing, if you're not coming over and hanging out in the Facebook group yet, which we now know affectionately as the Empire Builders space and place, please do. There's over 1,300 entrepreneurs in there and we talk about business. We have theme days for our chats each day. So Monday's theme day is One Thing Monday and we all commit to one thing we're going to get done that week. And it's just super, super fun, focusing, supportive, and you can make sales there too and find new clients. So please come. The link is bit.ly/start, grow, thrive. Till next week, stay good. Thanks for listening.